got the privilege of getting the vaccine today. The number one message I want to tell people is I need to be at home. I need to keep washing my hands, and I need to keep masking. I don't know right now if I can still transmit the virus. And we don't have that data.
Gotcha.
And so I don't know if I get the vaccine, go out somewhere, I could easily pick it up, spread it by the time I'm getting a response. And I could be vaccinated myself and I could still be transmitting it. So until we get community levels of the virus down, the public health orders have to remain.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 2020 podcast, bringing clarity to business, entrepreneurship, and life. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here to learn and to grow. If you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Apple Podcasts, and follow along on Spotify as well. And of course, if you're looking to get in touch with me, find me on Instagram at harbirsayan.od. Okay, so we have an incredible guest today to talk about a very, very relevant topic right now, maybe the most relevant topic across the entire world right now, which is the COVID-19 vaccine, which has just started to get started rolling out here in North America. And my wonderful guest today is Dr. Birinder Narang, who is a medical doctor, a family physician practicing in family practice setting in East Vancouver and in Burnaby. He's a clinical instructor with the Department of Family Practice at UBC, University of British Columbia, for those who are not from around here. He's also the vice chair on the board of directors for the Burnaby Divisions of Family Practice, which is a nonprofit organization that works to improve primary care. So and also he happened to have just gotten his vaccine today. So talk about being the most appropriate person to speak about this. Dr. Birinder Narang, thank you so much for joining me, Birinder. Appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here. I hope that everyone will hear out of this that I got the vaccine today and I feel perfectly fine. And if there's any key take-home messages, that's the number one.
Take-home message, you got the vaccine. You haven't grown a third arm, which is something you're just telling me off. Okay, we're going to get to that kind of stuff for sure. We're going to definitely speak to that type of thing in a second. Now, I want to start with, let's rewind the clock 8-9 months. Like, what has life been for you? You've been literally on the front lines. We talk about frontline workers. You have been that. So tell me what that's been like for you. What's your setting like? Who are you seeing? What are your patients like?
Yeah, so I mean, going back, and thanks for the great introduction, and thanks for having me and giving me a platform to talk about what's been happening and to try and help discuss COVID in general, and then discuss the vaccination that we're all eagerly waiting. And luckily, fortunate, I was able to get it, and I can't wait for the rest of my family members and the rest of our community to get it as well. But yeah, so going back, we know that the COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic back in second week of March. Can't remember the exact date. Pretty sure it was a Wednesday. And I know that because my main work is actually in a community health center on Commercial Drive in East Vancouver. And we do a lot of low barrier care, a lot of refugee patients, a lot of addictions, mental health, along with general family practice. And so and on top of that, like, we had an urgent and primary care center that had really just opened up a few weeks before the pandemic was hit. So, we as an organization had been working on how to improve primary care in East Van. A lot of goals. We know that there's a lot of barriers to care there, and a lot of the type of work we do, that there's a lot of difficulty that patients have accessing good evidence-informed primary care. So we had all these grand plans of what we're going to do and how we're going to fix that, and then COVID hit. And so quite quickly, the urgent care center really did get repurposed as one of the first testing sites in Vancouver. And so by Wednesday, we had already started testing people at this point. And at that point, the criteria were healthcare workers or people return travelers, specifically from China, and then it expanded to Italy, and then we had a few other countries. So, we were in this kind of flux of like trying to digest all this information that's coming in and apply it and see what's happening in Vancouver, what's happening in Burnaby, what's happening provincially, and make sure that we're trying to do consistent things and navigate patients' fears. And this is at a time where we didn't have a lot of insight in what this virus was still. We were just hearing reports as other people. We didn't know what to look for, what were the the most prevalent symptoms, and what were the maybe associated symptoms, and what were the not so common symptoms. So there was a lot of um, you know uh, using clinical assessment, and then knowing that and trying to apply this ever changing knowledge, and knowing at this time we also didn't know if we were going to have enough tests, and we didn't know if we were going to have enough PPE either. So we were like having to figure out, well, when do I have to change my gloves? When do I have to change my masks? Will I have enough masks? All these things. First of all, is this mask going to be effective?
Right.
So we're all going into the setting. So I remember Wednesday, we heard about it. By Thursday, I think I ended up pulling a 12-hour day because we just got inundated with calls. And I got pulled up from my regular clinic downstairs into the urgent care, and we just started testing people. And it just, that adrenaline rush that came on, like it lasted for a good month. I think between trying to plan the response there, and then with some of the work we do in divisions in Burnaby, I think I worked 28 out of the next 30 days straight.
Yes.
And yeah, and I can't really tell you a lot about it because it's a lot of blur. I know within a few days I had tested, I think, my first positive case, and it was a young Asian gentleman who had returned on a flight from New York. And yeah, and then within a week I started feeling something in my throat, so I got my first test. Luckily, that's only the only test I've had to have so far. But that was an experience for myself. And it makes you appreciate what we do to other people, because I swabbed a bunch of people by then, and then I realized, whoa, that's not comfortable,
It's
man.
not comfortable. No.
You've had one?
I have had it. I was feeling a little under the weather a couple of weeks back.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to miss work, or I didn't want to put my patients at risk, so I went and got the test. And then I was still feeling a little under the weather. I went and got it done a second time. I don't know if I should be admitting that because I don't want to waste resources, but I was like, I'm seeing people really close up. And man, that second time especially, I felt like somebody was like brushing my brain. It was so far up my nose.
Oh, I got very comfortable with telling patients, if I don't make you cry, I have not done this properly.
Oh.
And they did not appreciate that. And it really does show you the resilience of some people, and the not so resilience of other people.
Yeah,
I'd have these 3-year-olds who just take it like a champ, and then there's these mid-30s, really muscular people who would just tell me how much they hate me and never want to see my face again. So it was hilarious. But
awesome.
Everyone's there for anxiety, and our job is to do what we can to ease that anxiety, but also be realistic. And so when I tell them that, it's not because I'm trying to jab your brain. It's because you have this autonomic reaction that's going to happen. That's you're going to tear up, and you have to get a relevant or reliable sample. You have to be up there for a good 10 to 15 seconds.
Jeez, yeah,
yeah.
It's about which feels like 10 or 15 minutes when you're doing it, but yeah.
It does, and this is important. We'll come back to this, but when we talk about setting expectations, I mean, I think this is what is my job going forward now for people who are going to get vaccinated. So we'll get back to that in a bit, vaccination specifically, and how to educate people about that. But yeah, so we did that, and then on the Burnaby side of things, we were the first drive-through site that was set up, and within a few months, we were seeing 600 people a day, and that's at Central Park on Boundary.
Yeah.
And so our divisions, and leveraging some of the work we've done with the community in the past, we had great relationships with the Parks Board, the Burnaby City Council, and TELUS, I believe, were the ones who set up our infrastructure, and the RCMP. So we all came together, and within a few weeks, we had a functional site, testing people in a drive-through setting. We had doctors, nurses, we had traffic controllers, and it's still operating to this day, and it's still one of the busiest sites in the Lower Mainland.
That's where I had mine done, actually, because it's close to home for me. And it was cool to see, because I know that obviously when things were starting out in March, April, there was very little understanding of how this virus worked, but also like logistically, like how are we going to get all these people tested. But when I went and got it done, which was just a few weeks ago now, it was a super smooth process. So obviously you eventually start to streamline stuff, and it turns around a lot more quickly. But what were those, so those first few, you said you worked 28 out of the first 30 days, and I know you worked a bunch more after that. Did it feel chaotic? Did it feel crazy? Do you feel, what was the protocol? Was there a protocol? Was it like, man, we're just trying to feel our way through this? How was that whole scenario for you?
So for me, it was definitely all of the things you just described, but it was also And from a personal aspect, I was in the middle of doing a leadership and management development training course over the last
Wow.
year. And so for me, it was an opportunity to really apply some of these principles. So there was a lot of meeting, a lot of strategy meetings, and a lot of developing workflows and adjusting workflows on the fly. And I'm blessed that I work with great leaders in the medical field on in all aspects of my work. And so we were often reviewing things, discussing approaches, discussing script, educating our MOAs on how to pre-screen patients. So there was a lot of opportunity for leadership, and there was a lot of opportunity for innovation too. And what we did know is that there's been a big shift in primary care towards virtual delivery of care.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something that we had been discussing for a while, and we were already looking at implementing this before the pandemic hit. So you would see that like things that you would expect to take 12 months in a normal setting were done in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Out of necessity, out of and this was like testing implementation, and then just we got to go with it. Was phone call, e-faxing of prescriptions, video calls. At one point, I did a three-way video call with a patient that was with me who couldn't get to a dermatologist site, so the dermatologist and I videoed, and then we did the consult and the patient together.
That's awesome.
So I mean, that innovation and potential for innovation is something that we're now riding the wave of. We don't think that we don't expect that life's going to go back to normal in many ways, and in the delivery of medicine, we don't expect it to go back to the way it was last year.
No, for sure. I think some things have changed forever, and in our industry, for sure, as optometrists, a lot of this telehealth and e-commerce and stuff like that was like always there, right? We're always talking about it, but we're really slow to grasp it, and this just forced everybody into it now. And it's probably that is probably a good thing. Like, let's just we have to accept this and embrace it. So we're using it, and I'm sure that's going to help us now in medicine and optometry and stuff like that moving forward. So 100%. Let's jump back into the present now, and the vaccine is here, and there's a lot of different sentiments regarding the vaccine. But let's first talk about it as far as its actual, mode of action, method of action,
sure.
if you will. Tell us, what is an mRNA vaccine and how does it work?
Sure. So right now, this is December 20th. There's only one vaccine that's currently approved in Canada, and that's the Pfizer vaccine, and that's one of the mRNA vaccines that you just mentioned. We do expect in the next few days, hopefully, the Moderna vaccine, which is the other mRNA vaccine, will likely be approved. The third vaccine that we've heard a lot about is the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. That is not an mRNA vaccine, but it uses an adenovirus, a chimpanzee adenovirus vector, which is also a new tech. These are all new technologies. So that's to be clear. Now, those are the three big ones we heard of. The other big pharmaceutical companies are doing lots of trials. Johnson & Johnson, GSK, and a bunch of other ones. So we don't need to get into those. I think that's overcomplicating things. And we also don't know what's going to be approved in Canada, knowing that there's 150 ongoing trials right now, at least. So we'll talk about Pfizer. Pfizer's a big pharmaceutical company. If you've ever taken Viagra, that's Pfizer. So that's its claim to fame.
I'm going to assume that majority of our audience hasn't taken it, but I'm sure they've taken something else that was made by Pfizer.
No, but they might have gotten the meme about it. There was a meme going about Pfizer all the last week.
So, I see. So I haven't seen the meme. That's why. Okay.
So anyway, so that's the big company behind this, and they're we won't get too much into the politics of the vaccine development or the politics of COVID, because we could probably spend a few hours just talking about that. So we'll try to keep this just as high level informative as possible. mRNA, going back to basic cellular biology, mRNAs are the codes for protein synthesis. So you have your mRNA, it gets in your cellular apparatus, in your nucleus, it gets sent out of the nucleus, it goes into your ribosome, where the ribosome translates the mRNA into a protein, and that protein then goes and gets expressed on the cell wall, and then has a downstream effect on your different parts of your immune system, which are your T cells, which are your cytotoxic T cells, your helper T cells, and then your learned immunity, which is your B cells, and then eventually your plasma cells, which make your antibodies. So what the mRNA vaccine is, so they've taken So the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so that's the virus that's causing the COVID-19 syndrome, has tons of proteins. All viruses have tons of proteins that live on its cell wall. So one of them is called the spike protein, and that spike protein is the one that it's used to introduce the virus into the cell. And so what this is, it's a vaccine to make antibodies to that spike protein. So you're essentially inserting the programming code for the cell to make this protein for you. It's amazing technology. It's been used in various oncological, pharmaceutical drugs up until now, but this is the first time that this technology has been applied to a vaccination setting.
Gotcha.
So that's the big, those both, so now that's Pfizer and Moderna. So those are the two big ones we've heard about. Moderna just got approved 2 days ago. It got emergency use authorization by the United States. And that's why latest we've heard is Health Canada is just reviewing some of the manufacturing and distribution issues. And then we're expecting that it will be approved.
Gotcha. So the vaccine is delivering this mRNA into our cells, which is going to tell our cells to make the spike protein.
Exactly. So the vaccine is actually, it's the one part I didn't mention is that you probably heard this term nanoparticle that's going around. So it's basically, if we go back again, basic cellular biology, a lipid, phospholipid bilayer that surrounds this mRNA. And then that kind of is what you're injecting. So you're injecting this tiny nanoparticle lipid molecule that has the code inside of it. And then that code gets introduced into your cellular apparatus.
Gotcha. Is it specific types of cells in our body that are gonna like take this nanomolecule in, or like they just go into like all cells in our body? Do you know?
I won't go into all, and I think that's what comes down to what the dose is and the dosing interval of it to see how many of your cells take it up and how much is needed to then stimulate that plasma cell antibody effect down at the end of it. So I don't know exactly what the cell is that it's being uptaken in, but generally it's causing, you're expecting a cascading effect. So once you have one or some of the particle being made, then you have more antibodies recruited. And then with the booster, you're going to have other cells who have more. So the whole point of it is like we want to have lasting antibodies. And this is similar to when you get the actual virus. So we know that majority of people that get infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus aren't going to have significant illness. They're not. Some will be asymptomatic, and some will have very minor cough, cold symptoms, where other people will be intubated and die, unfortunately. So again, we don't know what causes and what's causing that significant immune response. And what this is trying to do is mimic that immune response without that massive inflammatory cascade that can lead to so much morbidity and mortality.
Gotcha. So okay, well let's lean on into that then, because that's obviously a concern that a lot of people are going to have. Is that if I'm doing this, if this is supposed to mimic the virus in my body or create the immune response, won't it cause me to get really sick like COVID potentially could?
Yeah.
So I mean, you've already kind of said it. So it would not create that inflammatory response that the actual virus would.
And there was actually thoughts of that. There were 100% worries of that at the beginning. That is exactly what it would do. That this is a new technology. How do we know it's not going to cause this massive immune response that's going to overwhelm you and have this? And so I think that to approach that, we need to look at how did we get here. So we know, like we already talked about 8-9 months ago, we first heard of this coronavirus. So obviously, there's no studies from before 8-9 months ago. No one knew. This hadn't been sequenced. We didn't have this genome of this virus. So how did we get from there to here? So one of the big tricks I learned from one of my best friends in med school, who is probably one of the smartest people I know now, he is always think about things from first principles. And we'll think about that for lots of things. And I know we're going to talk a bit about misinformation in a bit too. But we want to go back to first principles. So how do you design trials? And what is the point of a trial? So when we look at trials, there are two things we're looking for: safety and efficacy, whether that's a drug or a vaccine. How safe is it, and how effective is it? And how do we balance those two risks or those two endpoints potentially? So you have preclinical work that's done in animals. That's, you're figuring it out, you're injecting it, then you inject something with a virus to see if you can infect it. And once you realize, okay, I have something that potentially works, and we've ruled out any obvious safety concerns that we can, then we're going to start in a phase 1 trial, which is a small group, the first time in humans. And that's where they figure out, okay, well, we're going to have to figure out the dosing now. What is that dose to keep it in that threshold of safety and efficacy? And that'll be probably maybe 100 people, less than 100 people, maybe really small amounts of people, and from the general demographics. Then you look at phase 2 studies, which are larger, and that's supposed to be representative of the general population itself. That can be up to 1,000 people, and you want to have some variability in, gender, ethnicity, and kind of expand it out to what you expect the general parameters of a population is. By the time you're getting to a phase 3 study, we're talking huge numbers. So and this is what it's phase 3 data, which has now led to us getting this approval. So phase 3, so the Pfizer trial had 43,000, give or take a bit, people in it, and the Moderna trial had about 30,000 people in it. Gotcha. So the Pfizer trial and Moderna, they were both multinational, placebo-controlled, randomized control trials. And when you look at levels of evidence, that's what we look for. That's what we would aim for, and that's what we would expect from any study, or we would hope for any study. That's what us looking for new medications, like, right. Hey, this isn't placebo controlled. This wasn't randomized. This was under a single center in, Florida. How am I going to apply that to my patients living in Alaska? Yeah. So you want to really have that geographic, cultural, gender, age, all those kind of nuances, and have that balanced and controlled for while you're getting this data out. So we have that from this. And what both studies showed, although there were some differences in their populations and the study design, is that they both showed around close to 95% efficacy of this trial. Gotcha. Sorry, it's 95% efficacy of the vaccination. Now, when we look at safety, when we look at safety, we look at expected side effects of the vaccine, and then we look at long-term effects. So I can't tell you about long-term effects. No one can. Now that we're into phase 3, we're going to be into phase 4 now, actually, which is what's called post-market surveillance. To get authorized, they needed to show 2 months of safety data. And again, that's not unheard of, especially in the context of uncontrolled rise in cases around the world. We just passed 500,000 cases in Canada. And I don't even know where the U.S. is at this point, but it's out of control. And we're the amount of people dying in the U.S. every day is more than people who died in Pearl Harbor, more than the attacks of 9/11 total. So you're having that every day in the state. So the amount of so the pressure that's on there to say, okay, well, we have to do this, get safety data out. We want to make sure we're doing this rigorous attention to detail, but we also need to know that what is the criteria that's needed to get emergency authorization, and what is that threshold, and have we met that threshold? Yeah. So both of these vaccines seem to have done that. Gotcha. Well, that actually is interesting. You just bring that exact term, the emergency authorization, something that I've seen a lot of people having concern about. Like, why did this get pushed through? Did it meet all of the criteria that it was supposed to meet, or did you just say, okay, this is good enough, and let's get, not you, of course, the powers that be, just say, okay, this is good enough, let's get it out there. But from what you're telling me, it's met all of those same criteria and standards that we would put any drug up against, and before we bring it out to the general public. So that's good. Now, we can be confident of that. And it's also, sorry, before we move on, we also want to say that this happened in the UK, Canada, and the United States for Pfizer. So the United Kingdom, the National Health Service, which has a reputation for being very patient-centric, well, people who might not like working for it on the employee side, but for patients, they are did well by it. So, before we had it here, we hadn't seen what Health Canada had looked at for the trials. We had looked at, but the NHS had approved it. So for me, that was more confidence inspiring than the FDA. Like I don't like most people, I don't trust all of this stuff coming here. We talk about like political corruption, but when one of the biggest fears, and we're going to get into fears of the vaccine. So I don't know if you want to get into that now. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about the fears. The way I look at it, there are people who are anti-vaxxers who just fundamentally don't believe in vaccination. And then there are people who are vaccine hesitant. And then we can even further subdivide that group. There are people who are generally accept vaccination for the traditional ones that we've all with the measles, mumps, rubella, polio, diphtheria, meningococcal, all the ones that we get as kids. And that's great. But then about this one in particular, why this one is, and the word, one of the big things is we don't know long effects, and one of them is that corners were cut there. And we talked about the different phases of the studies. All those phases were done, but what the two sorry, I just want to reaffirm that I'm speaking as a family doctor. I'm not a clinical epidemiologist. I don't clinical trials. I don't have that background. So I have experience in it. I have experience in studying it, but definitely not designing them. But what I am as being the two biggest barriers to getting trials off the ground include the ethics of approval, funding, and funding. And then after you get that, enrollment. So let's say, three things. So you get ethics approval, funding, and enrollment. And that can take a long time. Now, this is the first time we've ever had a global concerted effort. We had people sharing information. The virus was sequenced within 48 hours. So within 48 hours, people were already doing that preclinical work, the animal studies and the safety study. So by the time it got to the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, whatever endpoints were set for that, they didn't cut any corners there. That was done as rigorously as they can. Now, you can argue about the study design and whether enough minorities were included or how applicable they are, or if the age cutoff was right. And, one thing we should talk about is that but neither the Moderna nor the Pfizer vaccine had any children in it. So anyone under the age of 16 or 18, and no pregnant women, and no people with autoimmune diseases or on immunosuppressant medication. So there's a huge chunk we still don't know. But what we do know is for the average person, and this is often done, this is not unique to this vaccine. Whenever you're trying to do a placebo-controlled trial, you tend to start in for the general population because that's where you're going to get the mass effect. And we have to remember, what is the goal of vaccination here? We know that we're not going to get to a level of herd immunity, and we can go over that term if you want in a bit. But the goal is to get to herd immunity, and what herd immunity means is when life starts to get back to normal, hopefully. So what is the goal? To get life back to normal.
Gotcha. So on that note, people, let's say somebody in the general public, we start getting this vaccine whenever we start to get it. Does that mean I got the vaccine, I'm good to go, I don't need to wear my mask, I don't need to do physical distancing and that type of stuff? Or what's the approach after you get the vaccine?
It's funny because this is the education part of it, and I'm really glad that you asked that. So like yourself, I'm trying to do my social media things these days, and so I was thinking, okay, now I've got the privilege of getting the vaccine today. What is the number one message I want to tell people after? And for me, what I could figure out is what I decided for myself. The number one message I want to tell people is I'm going home because I have nowhere else to be. I'm not working. I don't have anything else to do. The public health order says I need to be at home. So I need to be at home. I need to keep washing my hands, and I need to keep masking, because while we know that the vaccine and the efficacy it's going to have, first of all, it's going to take time to get there. There's evidence for the Pfizer vaccine that you'll have about 50% coverage between the first and second dose. 52% is the number. And then about a week after the second dose, you'll have that 90 to 95% coverage. But I'm not going to have that's only my chance of getting it. I don't know right now if I can still transmit the virus. And we don't have that data.
Gotcha.
And so I don't know if I get the vaccine, go out somewhere, I could easily pick it up, spread it by the time I'm getting a response. And I could be vaccinated myself, and I could still be transmitting it. So until we get community levels of the virus down, the public health orders have to remain.
Gotcha. So it's not until a majority of the population or a certain critical number of the population has gotten vaccinated that we can kind of become lenient on those things. Okay.
And that number is going to be around 2/3 to 70. It's like 66%, 2/3 to 3/4, 75%. That's the estimated number that I've been reading is what we need to get to, or the goal to get to.
Got it. So misinformation, tell me a couple of things at least that you want to talk about or address or, kind of fight back against that you've seen and heard.
Yeah. So again, when I talk about, let's go back to first principles, what is information? How do you assess information? And then we'll talk about some misinformation about vaccination. And then we'll bring it back and talk a bit about what to expect when you get the vaccine. So I think your listeners, viewers are probably going to want to hear that.
Yeah.
So for information, what is information? Information is some knowledge that's passed from one person, one vector to another. And so you can have misinformation that might be intentional or not unintentional, which is information that's not necessarily correct. You can also have disinformation, which is essentially people doing things with malevolent intent.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually spreading information that's not true. That's the fake news. So how we don't know what we're getting, but we have a lot of control over processing the information that we get. And then we have what we need to do is like I've gotten this article sent to me on WhatsApp. What's my systematic approach now to say, is this information or disinformation? And I get this asked all the time. I'll get forwarded a video or something, and I'll say, hey, is this true? And I'll say, if you, like 99% of the time, if you have to ask me if something's true, it's probably going to be false. Because it's going to be something that's sensational. It's going to be out there. It's going to be like me growing an extra arm out of getting this vaccine, which I had a whole bunch of people ask me today. I don't know if that's something that's been going around, but yeah.
Maybe there's another meme we haven't seen yet.
Maybe exactly. So if you have that, pass it on to us. So first, you want to assess the source. What are the sources? So you want to go to credible organizations. So for me, like as a medical professional, I'm going to look to the College of Family Physicians. I'm going to talk to look at the Canadian Medical Journal. I'm going to look at the BC CDC. I'm going to look at my local health authorities, Fraser Health and Vancouver Coastal Health. And then if I'm looking for general news, there are reputable organizations, the New York Times, the Washington Post, in Canada, and CBC. They're quite, they're reputable organizations. Our big three organizations, Global, CBC, CTV, we can expect that there's reliable information coming out of there. And they've done their rigorous journal fact checking, and that there's journalistic integrity there. For the most part. So you want to go, one that we see is that there's often sensational headlines. So if something appears as a sensational headline, you want to go beyond this. And so this kind of approach I'm using is actually something that's been presented by the World Health Organization and the Canadian Medical Journal. So there is evidence to back this up, and institutional support. So you want to go beyond the headline. Then once you look at the headline, who's written this? When was it written? And I'm subject to this too. I'll see an article. I fell for this a few weeks ago. I got an article about mandatory vaccinations and the BC Nursing Union, and it was about how they were changing their rules for it. And it flabbergasted me. Why would you be changing vaccination rules during a pandemic? So as everyone, I kind of got this. I got caught with this headline. This headline was from a year ago. And so I didn't go through this. We're all susceptible to this, despite our best intent. So if you get got by one of these, it's not your fault.
Yeah, but it's really important to be vigilant more than ever, right? Because of what's happening. Everything.
Yeah, and you need to have a systematic approach that you can apply in settings in our personal and our professional lives. And then you want to see, once you've done that, you want to look, what is the evidence? Is this article referenced, or is this referenced, and who is it referenced by? And then you kind of want to go through. You can actually go through this, but there are actually quite a lot of independent fact-checking organizations now because of the prevalence of mis and disinformation. And then when you're doing it, and this is a huge one, we need to check our own biases. I talked about the organizations I felt are reputable, but that's me declaring my bias towards those organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So how am I can't say that 100% of something coming from potential right-wing organizations is not true, but maybe it is. I need to check that if I'm reading from there. I still need to check that, and don't forget to check that bias when I'm reading something that I'm expecting information to, because often things slip through the cracks.
Yeah. So you wanted to talk about what to expect when a person gets the virus. You've got, not the virus, the vaccine. You got the first dose today. Tell us, from your personal experience, and then just in general from your medical knowledge, what we should expect.
And Thanks for getting back to that. I wanted to make sure we covered this, is because so now I feel fine. I have a bit of, I got it in my left arm. I have a little bit of mild soreness there. Probably still have my, oh, I don't even, I lost my band-aid. Anyway, but so we,
Just looking for an
so
excuse
we,
to flex your bicep in
I
front
know
of the
exactly. Yeah.
camera.
He told me this was on video. I couldn't help myself. So, what we do expect are general side effects. Now, the biggest myth we talked about that before we get into safety, this vaccine, these two vaccines specifically, cannot give you the virus. There's no live attenuated virus. There's no dead virus. There's no plausible way for you to get the virus. So you cannot get COVID from this vaccine. And I think we just need to say that as period. Your biology cannot be altered by this DNA. Period. And we went through a bit of the biology earlier to just really kind of there's the mRNA that's injected into your body, it can't last. It won't last past 10 to 14 days in your body. And that's why we're seeing the Pfizer vaccine having to be distributed at this minus 70 to 80 degree ultra low freezers. It's because the mRNA is very fragile. So it will degrade if it's not used. And so we're not going to get into listed logistics distribution, but that's a huge issue when we look at rural, remote communities and the third world. Again, if we want life to get normal for everyone, we need the entire globe to reach some level for life to get back to, for us to feel comfortable getting on planes and, having some semblance of normalcy. So those are the two big ones. It will not, there's no, we're not going to get into the 5G microchipping. That's just garbage. That's intentional disinformation that is not worth your time listening to. So forget that.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I know I've heard whispers of that or conversations about that too. So
yeah, so people are asking me if Bill Gates knows where I am right now, and I say, well, I uploaded a photo on Instagram that was geotagged, so I'm sure someone knows.
yeah, if Bill Gates doesn't know, Mark Zuckerberg knows. Somebody knows.
Someone's going to know. Unless you're off the grid, you don't have internet, and that's the reality of living in a technologically enabled world. But these are very real concerns about, can you get COVID and will it alter your DNA? These are very valid concerns, and these have been, from the evidence we have. The New England Journal of Medicine did an independent review of the safety. That's one of the gold standard journals. It was published 5 days ago, and there's a lot of what I'm telling you right now is the safety that they've described. So we can expect we're going to get tired. We're going to get headaches, muscle pains, joint pains, chills, maybe a low-grade fever. So they're saying 67% of people may experience these effects after one dose of the vaccine, and 3/4 of people might expect a side effect after dose 2. So these side effects might make you feel like you have COVID, but you won't have COVID. But if you have these side effects, it might be reasonable to get a COVID test because you could have still picked up the virus 3 days ago and you're just presenting with symptoms now. One thing that they will screen you for when you're getting the vaccine is whether you have any allergies, and specifically allergies towards pegylated glycol, which is PEG 3350 is a very common laxative. It's used in some skin product. If someone's heard of Restoralax or Laxaday, that is polyethylene glycol. Sorry, polyethylene glycol.
I think it's used in some eye drops as well. So I think people in our field are kind of familiar with that. Yeah,
exactly. And so if you have an anaphylactic or severe reaction to that, this vaccine is not for you. If you have, like we talked about the other, like you're pregnant, if you're and again, this might change. I know that there's controversy already about pregnancy where the Americans are saying it's safe, and I'm not sure where the Canadians have landed on it yet. But right now, I think this is where we'll go back to what our local advice is. Local advice right now, as far as I understand, not for pregnant, not for children. Pfizer is doing a study in 12 to 16. And when we talked about phase 4 earlier, which is the post-market surveillance, they're going to have 2 years more data, and there's going to be ongoing trials. So like part of this next challenge over these next 6 to 9 months is still what we've been doing the last 6 to 9 months, is how do we digest and apply information. And I look at that, at my point of view, as a family doctor for the patient in front of me, but also as someone who works in community nonprofit organizations. How can we get this messaging out to the entire community? And that some stuff like this is really helpful for that, really to make sure that we're giving consistent messaging. But so now we can expect those minor side effects. That's common, and we need to prepare people for that. I think that's part of the education. If I'm counseling someone about getting a vaccine, I'll tell them, yeah, you might not feel great that first day. You might need to take the next day off of work. You should probably give your employer a heads up that you might need the day off. but this is not the virus. You're not going to get the virus. This is good. The reason you're getting this symptom is because your immune system is reacting to it. You're stimulating your immune system. When you get a fever, when I have patients that bring in their 2-year-old and they have a fever and they're rightfully concerned, as we all would be of our little ones. But I tell them this is good. They're mounting a fever. That's your body fighting it. That's fighting the infection.
Yeah,
It's about normalizing side effects for people.
Right. When with the child thing or the fever thing, we're kind of trained to think fever is bad, which I mean, you have to be careful when you have a fever, especially a child. But like you're saying, is technically it's a good thing that showing that the body's able to mount the response, and that's actually really great that you mentioned that because I'd read that, of course, because it's an mRNA, it's not an attenuated virus or whatever that's going. There's no chance that you can get the actual virus from this, but you will still get the symptoms. But more importantly, you may still want to get checked because you might have contracted the virus a few days ago before you got the vaccine, just by pure coincidence, and you wouldn't want to like overlook that potential of you getting it there.
And also, yeah, exactly, 100%. And also, we're looking at. I only talked about the first few days, but we also said like you're still only going to have potentially 50% coverage in the first few weeks. So if you go out and start altering your behaviors, then your points of contact and points of picking up the virus are still, innumerable in some cases, depending on your behaviors.
Right. Yeah. That's the other thing. Like we touched on, is just because you got the shot doesn't mean now you can go out and do those things that you've been like, hoping you could get, go to the bar or meet your friends or whatever, because that's just going to really significantly increase your risk of contracting the virus. It's going to counteract that 50% that the first dose is helping you. All right, man. Any other specific things related to COVID or the vaccine? I have a couple other questions unrelated that I want to ask you. So if you want to cap it off with any other information.
No, I think that when I think about, I think the last point I want to talk about is when we look at long-term safety. And I think if anyone's trying to tell you that they know about long-term safety, they're feeding you disinformation, because we don't have that now. So I think that's part of my analysis. So what we can do is we can infer from overall vaccine knowledge that we've accumulated over the years, which is the majority of people that are going to get side effects from vaccines are going to get it early on. And that's why one of the things we can feel confident. So we have to have confidence in the science, and we have to have a confidence in the system. And it's one of the things I probably should have mentioned early is this is a common phrase that's heard these days: vaccines are a victim of their own success. We are vaccine hesitant now. We worry about vaccines because we haven't seen our family members die from measles or polio, or like most of the when we get the pneumonia shots, most strains of pneumonia that were causing throats and throat infections and ear infections, we don't see those that day because of successful vaccination. And what we know is that for this to be successful, we need everyone, as many people as we know, to get vaccinated. So those are two things. Like, yes, it's okay to be hesitant, but try to reach out to someone, try to assess the information, talk to your family doctor, look at credible resources, know that there's no government conspiracy here. We all want the economy to get back to normal, but realistically, for life and economy and whatever our expectations are, it is going to be a successful vaccination program that's going to get us there.
Gotcha. Yeah, very, very important to cap it off with that information. Thank you. Before we go into those last couple of questions, you mentioned that you're on social media. You mentioned that, and of course, I follow you. We've known each other for a long time, so I've been following you. But I've seen what you're doing, right? Which is trying to spread the accurate information, trying to fight disinformation. So you're a great resource for this. So where can people find you? Where can they follow you? And then maybe if there's one or two other resources that you want to share that people can, rely on and look towards.
Sure. Yeah, please. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm pretty active on Twitter and on Instagram, and my accounts all used to be private, but they all became public at the beginning of COVID once I knew, and I don't know if it's right or so, but just that this was going to be an issue and there was going to be a lot of information. So I really repurposed my social media to be more about content and education and engagement rather than me putting up my last meal. So It's Dr. Birinder Singh, so DrBirinderSingh, and that's on Twitter and Instagram. And I try to share information and what's happening in COVID specific role in BC, and other issues that we haven't really had time to touch on. Like there's a lot of racial inequities and socioeconomic inequities that are being come to light. I do a lot of addictions work, so we've been suffering from worsening overdose deaths over the last 6 months, and this is all happening concurrently with COVID. So all we've talked about today is pure COVID. We have to think about what is the other effect of COVID on people's existing mental health concerns or their existing substance use disorder. So I try to share whatever I can from that point of view.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I know I've learned a lot from following along with you on Instagram. So I think that's a great resource. I think, I would highly recommend you follow whatever your preferred medium is, whether it's Twitter or Instagram. Follow Dr. Narang there and be vigilant.
Sorry, you asked about other resources. So
yeah,
sorry, I should have mentioned that.
You got so caught up talking about yourself.
I know.
You forgot that.
Story of my life. No, but I follow. I talked about a few of them, but for me, Canadian Medical Journal, CMAG is the short term. They release great content. If you're a healthcare professional, UBC's Continuing Professional Development Program has been doing a series on COVID-19 webinars. One of my roles, I mentioned, I've actually been summarizing some of them. So that's a great opportunity for me to stay up to date too, because we have, last week we had a webinar that had the leaders from the medical laboratories of the BC CDC, public health officers provincially, and a few other public health officers, and even Dr. Bonnie Henry, who's our provincial health officer, has done some of these in the past. So I strongly recommend, even though they will be quite technical for a lot of people, they're free. There are thousands of people that log into these webinars, and all the content is then, the videos are on the website. So that's just UBC CPD. If you just Google that plus COVID-19, you'll see the entire archive there. So I think if it's an institutional, like organizational, wherever you live, your organization, we talk about UBC because that's our local medical school. That's where our research and that's where our subject matter experts work. So you might, if you're in Toronto, I'm sure University of Toronto has something very similar.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So as I said, I wanted to kind of shift away from the discussion specific to COVID and the vaccine. And there's two questions I ask all guests that come on the podcast. And I'd love to ask you because you have we didn't touch on 99% of stuff that you deal with, or your life is surrounding in music and dance and all the other stuff that you've done in your career pre-medical school and everything else. So, or even during, probably, right? But these two questions are more kind of about life experience. So the first of the two questions is, if we could hop in a time machine and go back to a time in your life where you were having a difficult time, you were struggling. You can share that moment if you want. If not, that's fine. But more importantly, I'd like for you to share what advice you would give to yourself at that time.
Sure. I mean, I think all of us are a product today of where we come from. And so while we may have wished for things to turn out differently in the past, we can't be too harsh on ourselves, because it is those moments that have gotten us to where we are today, for the better or for the worse. And if it's for the worse, it's a learning experience. If it's for the better, it shaped you. So either way, it shaped you. So I mean, for me, I was pretty unfocused early in my college years, as many people were. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was trying engineering, and at the time, as you said, I was getting caught up in playing a lot of drums. I play the Punjabi drum called the dhol. So I was playing a lot of parties, and for me, two things I would have told myself is really just to focus, like to try and find better balance early in your life. Because I think at that time we thought we could take on everything, and I was trying to take on too much, and I wasn't able to find that balance. So I think to have a realistic discussion about what you're able to take on, and then push yourself to go beyond your limits. Once we push ourselves, we all find out that we're capable of pretty amazing things. But then also, as part of that too, is not to be too harsh on yourself. Even through now, I go through a lot of regrets. Well, I wish I totally didn't study for that exam. And if I had, I know this material. I could
Mm.
have done that easily. So, but a lot of that, I'm where I am now, and um, I need to understand that we don't know the butterfly effect of things, right? So maybe if I had been better in early school, I wouldn't have even ended up in medicine. I don't
Mm.
know to predict. So I think about just appreciating the balance that I wish I had had then, but also knowing that I was pretty harsh on myself for a long time after that, and
Yeah.
that is counterproductive too.
Those are two, well, you gave yourself two, or us, two pieces of advice, which I think are really relevant and important. So the
I'm an
last question.
overachiever. What can I say?
Well, look, like I said, I've known you for a very long time, and there were many times where I'm like, does this guy even sleep? Like, how are you doing these things? Everything. And you know what you do in some parts of your life, you kind of do it on all parts of your life, right? So you've clearly done a lot of stuff, and you made it here, which is very admirable. So the last question is, you've made it here, all the things that you have done, all the crazy experiences that you've had. How much of that would you say is due to luck, and how much is due to hard work?
Um, I think that's an impossible question to answer because what is luck? I mean, it's not a quantifiable thing, and
Sure.
so you're.
Well, you tell me. Well, hey, so it's, yeah, whatever the best answer you could come up with
Yeah,
is
no, I
fine.
know. I think that
Don't dodge it.
uh, it's I can't quantify it like I say, but I think that and maybe I'll turn to a bit. I'm obviously an observant sick, and I use my faith to inform me in a lot of things. And so I don't believe in you not having control over like the direction of your life, and saying that you might not have control over everything. We believe that there is a path that's set, but you're presented options. So while there might be an element of chance or luck, or the stars having to line, however you believe in you getting there, you have the power of self-determination. So anything that you want to achieve in life, you have to put you first of all, if you don't put 100% in, you all you're going to be asking is like, well, didn't I? And would the outcome be different?
Mm-hmm.
And then, and then there will be times where you put in 100% and the outcome won't be what you desire. And that there's an element of chance. And I tell people, like, when they're prepping for residency interviews now, you can have the perfect transcript, you can have the perfect report, but there will be an element of luck. And if you're getting into the position that you want. And so I don't know how to quantify it, but I do think that there is a balance and a relationship between the two of them, and appreciating that balance is there will leave you in a better place, and again, leave you without that feeling of regret.
Mm.
And we all have that at times. But I would, if we can minimize that, this is one strategy to do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that very philosophical answer. But I do. Well, you're right, though. It is a hard one to quantify. Some people jump and give a very hard number, and some people like to kind of say, okay, well, like you said, it's a balance, which of course it is. So I want to say thank you, Dr. Narang, for doing this. Thank you for everything that you have done, and everybody else. If there's any other frontline workers, doctors, nurses, whoever listening to this, respiratory therapists, that have been out there doing the job while the rest of us, were quarantining, or, have been taking a step back. Thank you for doing that. And now, I feel like a different way of putting yourself out there, being one of the first people to get the vaccine, is also something to say thank you to, because the rest of us, who might be nervous about it, will be looking to see how you do with it. And so thanks for putting yourself out there and being a leader in that regard. And
I'll keep putting selfies up, man, if that's what it takes.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everybody who listened and watched. If you didn't watch, please do, because I just put up 2 pictures, beautiful paintings that my 3-year-old daughter did. So you can tune in. This is the first time you'll see those on the wall behind me. But again, however you're consuming this, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, leave a rating. Let me know what you thought. Reach out to Dr. Narang as well. If you have any questions, if you're looking for a good resource online, he's a great one. Thanks again, guys. I'll be back with another amazing episode very, very soon. Talk to you again.